She raised her glass, smiled at everyone around the table, and said, "To new beginnings." My friends chuckled, thinking it was just a toast, something lighthearted, a joke to mark my birthday. But I knew exactly what she meant. She wasn't talking about us. She wasn't talking about our marriage. She was talking about the life she had already started building without me. Everyone thought I would laugh along, maybe nod and pretend it didn't sting. Instead, I just leaned back, kept my smile steady, and waited. By the end of the night, she would understand that not every man suffers in silence. Some of us prepare in silence. Some of us strike in silence. And that strike is louder than any words could ever be. Before we go further, make sure to subscribe, like this video, and leave a comment with what you would have done if you were in my shoes. It was supposed to be a celebration, my birthday, my evening. We had chosen my favorite restaurant, a place we had gone to for years, the kind of place where the waiters knew my name, where the lighting was warm and golden, and the wine glasses sparkled under chandeliers. The air smelled of grilled steak and garlic butter, of fresh bread brought to the table in baskets, still steaming. The atmosphere was elegant but comfortable, and I should have been relaxed. My friends had gathered, a handful of people I had known for decades, men and women who had stood beside me through milestones, through better days. At the head of the table, I should have felt like the guest of honor. Instead, I sat with a weight pressing on me that no one else could see. To anyone watching, Emily looked perfect that night. She wore a black dress that clung to her figure, her blonde hair curled, her red lipstick just bold enough to turn heads. She laughed easily, flashed smiles, touched my shoulder whenever she wanted to remind everyone she was the supportive wife. But I knew the truth. I had seen the messages, the late-night calls she thought I hadn't noticed, the sudden excuses to stay late at work. Her new beginnings had nothing to do with me, and everything to do with the man she thought I didn't know about. My anger wasn't hot. It was cold, sharpened by weeks of preparation, and it kept me steady as I sat across from her, watching her act the part of devoted spouse. The dinner itself unfolded like any other celebration. Plates clattered as servers brought out appetizers, glasses clinked with every toast, laughter bubbled around the table. My friends shared old stories, teasing me about college days, about missteps I'd long since learned to laugh at. I smiled, nodded, played along. But beneath the surface my thoughts were a quiet storm. I caught her once or twice looking at me, trying to gauge if I had caught the edge of her toast, if I understood the double meaning behind those two words. I gave her nothing. My face was calm, my posture relaxed, my voice even. I had no reason to fight her here, not in front of friends, not on this night. She thought she had the power. She thought she was the one holding the secret. But power shifts in silence. When the entrees arrived, the table was filled with the rich scent of roasted meats, sautéed vegetables, plates laid down in front of each guest with practiced elegance. She leaned toward me, touched my hand, and whispered, "This is the start of something new." Her voice was light, casual, but I could hear the weight behind it. I could hear the pride she carried for the betrayal she thought was still hidden. I lifted my glass, clinked it gently against hers, and smiled. "To new beginnings," I said softly. She laughed, not realizing she was laughing at her own undoing. Around us, the restaurant buzzed with life, waiters rushing to tables, the hum of conversations blending into a symphony of voices, silverware tapping against plates. It was a place built on warmth, on celebration, on the idea that special nights should be remembered. And this night would be remembered, but not for the reasons she thought. I sat there, eating my meal, listening to the rhythm of the evening, letting every detail settle into memory. Her dress catching the light, the curve of her smile when she leaned too close to a friend, the way my friends clapped me on the back, oblivious to the undercurrent flowing through the room. I stayed silent, and in that silence, I felt stronger than I had in years. She believed she was leading me into humiliation, that I was too blind to see the knife she had already planted in my back. What she didn't know was that the bill was coming, and with it, something she would never be able to laugh off. The days leading up to that dinner had been a study in self-control. I had known about her affair for weeks, maybe months, if I was honest with myself. At first I had dismissed the late-night texts as harmless, the sudden absences as stress from work, the new energy in her voice as nothing more than her reinventing herself, the way people sometimes do when they reach a certain age. But patterns don't lie. Phones lighting up at odd hours, the brief smile she tried to hide when reading a message, the way she began to dress differently, her laughter sounding less like it was for me and more like it belonged to someone else. It would have been easy to confront her immediately, to start a shouting match, to demand answers. That's what most men do, and that's why most men lose. Instead, I chose silence. I studied. I waited. I gathered proof until I had more than enough to burn down the little empire of secrets she thought she had built. Every detail, every receipt, every late-night call log. I had it all neatly stacked away in a folder she didn't even know existed. When I walked into that restaurant for my birthday dinner, that folder was already with me, tucked inside a plain white envelope, resting at the bottom of my jacket pocket. I felt its weight even as I smiled at my friends, shook hands, and sat at the head of the table. She thought she was clever, raising her glass and toasting to new beginnings. She thought I would let it slip by as some empty phrase, a vague promise of change. But that toast was her confession, wrapped in a bow of arrogance. She had no idea I was already prepared to give her exactly what she had toasted to. The meal went on, course after course. She played her role, laughing a little too loudly, leaning in just a little too close to me when she thought people were watching. I could feel the eyes of my friends on us, some of them maybe even wondering if we were as happy as she made it seem. And perhaps that was her point. She wanted to control the narrative. She wanted to paint herself as the perfect wife, supportive and loving, so that when she eventually revealed her new life, she would stand blameless in the eyes of everyone who mattered. But narratives are fragile, and once the truth is exposed, no one remembers the script you rehearsed. They only remember the performance that falls apart on stage. I let her speak. I let her laugh. I let her smile. I didn't interrupt, didn't contradict, didn't reveal a single hint of what I carried in my pocket. My silence was deliberate, and as the evening wore on, it grew heavier, more powerful. At one point, one of my oldest friends, Daniel, leaned over and asked if I was all right. I nodded, smiled, lifted my glass. To him, it probably looked like I was simply tired, maybe overwhelmed by the attention. But inside, I was calm, clearer than I had been in years. When the waiter returned to clear the plates, I felt my pulse steady. The moment was approaching. Emily leaned across the table, her eyes gleaming in the candlelight, and whispered, "You look so serious tonight. Relax. It's your birthday." I smiled at her, a smile I'm sure she misread as reassurance. She touched my hand lightly, and for a split second I wondered if she even believed her own performance. But the thought passed as quickly as it came. There was no room for doubt anymore. The dessert arrived, rich slices of chocolate cake with raspberries on white plates, a single candle lit on mine. Everyone clapped, laughed, and sang. I blew out the candle, made a silent wish, though it wasn't really a wish at all. It was a decision, one that had already been made long before this night. And when the laughter faded, when the plates were pushed aside, the waiter returned with the bill, neatly folded in its black leather case. That was when I reached into my jacket. My fingers brushed against the edge of the envelope, smooth and cool, as though it had been waiting for this exact moment. I opened the case, slipped the envelope inside with the check, and closed it again. The waiter, trained in discretion, didn't even blink. He simply picked it up and carried it back. A few minutes later he returned, setting the case gently on the table between us. Emily reached for her purse, assuming she was about to do what she often did, pretend to fuss about splitting the bill before I inevitably covered it. But when she opened the case, her smile faltered. Inside, alongside the restaurant receipt, was the envelope. She looked at me, puzzled, then slowly slid a manicured finger under the flap and opened it. Her eyes moved quickly over the first page, then slowed as comprehension hit her. Her lips parted slightly, her face draining of color as she flipped through the stack. Around us, the table fell silent. The laughter, the clinking of glasses, the casual chatter. All of it died as every eye turned toward her. She didn't speak, didn't laugh, didn't even attempt to explain. The weight of what she held in her hands was louder than any words she could have chosen. And I just sat there, calm, composed, watching her realize that the new beginnings she toasted to were no longer hers to control. I leaned back in my chair, folded my hands neatly in my lap, and let the silence stretch. No one at the table dared to break it. Not Daniel, not the other friends, not even Emily. The envelope lay open in front of her, its contents undeniable, and for the first time in a long time, I was the one holding the script. She had played her part. Now it was my turn. The moment she realized what was in that envelope, everything around us shifted. The restaurant no longer sounded the same. The voices from other tables, the clinking of glasses, the faint music playing overhead. All of it faded as if the entire room had been stripped down to just her and me. Emily sat frozen, her hand trembling slightly as she held the pages. Her lips moved once, forming words she couldn't seem to force out, and then she closed her mouth again. My friends, people who had known me for decades, watched in absolute silence. Some of them glanced at each other, some stared at the table, others kept their eyes locked on me, waiting to see what I would do next. I didn't move. I didn't speak. That was the beauty of it. For years, Emily had relied on the fact that I would always explain myself, always try to smooth over awkward moments, always do the work of making her feel comfortable. But not tonight. Tonight, I let the silence speak for me. Emily finally set the papers down on the table, her hands still resting on them as though she could hide them from view. "What is this?" she whispered, though it came out more like a plea than a question. I tilted my head slightly, studying her, and then glanced at the waiter standing nearby. He looked nervous, unsure if he should step away, but I gave him a small nod. He left quickly, leaving the table in complete stillness. Emily tried again, her voice a little louder. "Michael, what is this supposed to mean?" She used my name like a weapon, as though saying it could remind me of the bond we once had, as though it would pull me back into line. But I didn't flinch. I didn't lean forward. I didn't offer her an escape. One of my friends, Karen, finally cleared her throat. "Emily," she said carefully, "I think you know what that means." The way she said it told me she had suspected something for a long time. Maybe others had too. Betrayal always leaves traces. And maybe they had seen the way Emily smiled at her phone a little too often, or how her attention wandered when I spoke. Emily whipped her head toward Karen, her face flushing red. "No, you don't understand," she started. But her voice cracked, and she cut herself off. She looked back at me, her eyes wide now, desperate. But desperation didn't suit her. She had built her image on control, on always appearing one step ahead, and seeing her unravel piece by piece was almost surreal. The waiter returned then, setting fresh glasses of water on the table. He didn't say anything, didn't even look at us, but I could see the way his hands moved a little too quickly, the way his eyes darted once toward the envelope before he forced them away. People notice more than they admit, and in that moment, even a stranger could sense what was happening. Emily shifted in her chair, clutching the fabric of her dress as if grounding herself. "We don't need to do this here," she said in a low voice, meant only for me. "Let's talk at home." Her words were shaky, her tone stripped of the confidence she had carried just an hour earlier when she toasted to her so-called new beginnings. I let the suggestion hang in the air, gave her the silence she feared most. The silence stretched long enough that Daniel finally spoke up. "Maybe this is exactly where it needed to happen," he said, his voice steady. He didn't look at Emily. He looked at me. That support, subtle as it was, mattered. For years I had felt alone in this marriage, surrounded by her family, her friends, her world. But here, in this moment, my own people saw the truth laid bare. Emily turned to Daniel with fury flashing in her eyes. "This isn't your business," she snapped, but the quiver in her voice betrayed her. She wasn't angry. She was afraid. She tried to compose herself, sitting up straighter, brushing her hair back with one hand. "You're overreacting," she said to me. forcing her voice into a calm that didn't quite fit. "We can work through this. People make mistakes." I almost laughed at that, though not because it was funny. Mistakes are tripping over a word during a speech, missing a payment on a bill, forgetting to call someone back. What she had done wasn't a mistake. It was a choice, repeated over and over again until it became a second life. And now she wanted to reduce it to something as small as a slip of the tongue. I looked at her for a long moment, then finally said, "You raised your glass to new beginnings. Consider this mine." Her face fell. Around us, the table remained motionless, the weight of my words settling over everyone. The candles flickered in the center, the plates half finished, the desserts untouched. Emily blinked rapidly, as if trying to clear her vision, as if hoping this was some nightmare she would wake up from. But the papers in front of her were real, and there was no waking up from them. She looked down at them again, flipping through as though she might find a loophole, a mistake, something to prove it wasn't final. But every page, every signature line, every detail was airtight. She could search forever, but she wouldn't find an exit. I stood then, slowly, deliberately, pushing my chair back with a soft scrape against the floor. The sound echoed louder than I expected, or maybe it just seemed that way because no one dared to move. Emily's eyes shot up to mine, panic flickering behind them. "Where are you going?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I slipped my wallet out, laid my credit card neatly on the bill, and looked at her one last time. "I'm leaving you exactly what you wanted," I said calmly. "A new beginning." Then I turned and walked toward the door. I could feel the eyes of the entire restaurant on me as I moved, but I didn't rush. I didn't hide. I walked with the quiet certainty of a man who had carried his burden long enough and had finally put it down. Behind me, Emily remained seated, surrounded by my friends, with the papers spread across the table like shattered glass. Not a single person spoke as I left. Not one. The silence was complete, absolute, and in that silence I found my freedom. When I stepped out of the restaurant that night, the cool air hit me like a cleansing wave. The street was alive with sound. Cars rolling past, conversations drifting from nearby bars, the faint rhythm of music carried on the breeze. But none of it touched me. I walked slowly, deliberately, the weight of years of betrayal sliding off my shoulders with every step. For the first time in a long time, I felt light, unburdened. I reached my car, leaned against it for a moment, and looked back at the glowing windows of the restaurant. Inside, Emily was still sitting there, surrounded by my friends, the divorce papers spread out in front of her like the ruins of a castle she had thought indestructible. The image stayed with me, but not as pain. It was closure. I drove through the city that night with no destination, letting the streets guide me. My hands rested loosely on the wheel, the silence in the car filled only by the hum of the engine. I thought about the years I had given her. Birthdays, anniversaries, trips, quiet evenings at home, and how she had traded them for secret texts, late-night calls, and stolen hours with someone else. It should have hurt more than it did. Maybe once it would have. But betrayal, when it's repeated often enough, dulls the wound until it's no longer pain but clarity. And that clarity had been my weapon. Over the following days, the ripples of that night spread quickly. Emily called again and again. At first her voice was pleading, begging me to talk, insisting that we could work it out. She left long voicemails, sometimes crying, sometimes angry, always trying to pull me back into the web I had cut myself free from. I didn't answer, not once. Silence had been my ally that night at the table, and it remained my ally now. My lawyer handled everything, every message, every negotiation. I didn't need to waste another word on her. Friends began reaching out too. Some of them wanted to check on me, others wanted to confirm what they had seen. A few admitted they had suspected for a long time but hadn't known how to tell me. I didn't blame them. Betrayal is often obvious only in hindsight. What mattered was that when the truth finally came into the light, they had sat there with me in silence, letting Emily face the reality she had created. Their loyalty meant more to me than they could ever know. Emily's story, of course, was different. She tried to spin it, to paint herself as misunderstood, as trapped in a marriage that no longer fulfilled her. But the problem with lies is that they don't hold up under pressure. Too many people had been there that night, had seen the papers with their own eyes, had heard the weight in my voice when I told her I was giving her the new beginning she wanted. She couldn't erase that moment. She couldn't charm her way out of it. For once, her carefully built image cracked, and everyone saw what was behind it. I found myself enjoying the quiet that followed. Evenings no longer felt heavy. Mornings no longer carried that subtle tension of wondering what excuse she would give, what story she would spin. My home became my own again, every corner free of her whispers and laughter meant for someone else. I picked up old hobbies I had abandoned, reconnected with people I hadn't seen in years, rediscovered the simple pleasure of being alone without feeling lonely. The silence that once felt suffocating now felt like freedom. Weeks turned into months, and the process moved forward. Emily fought at first, of course. She tried to contest, to delay, to claw back some sense of control. But every move she made was met with the same calm, steady wall I had built. She had underestimated me for so long that she didn't know how to fight someone who no longer played by her rules. In the end, it wasn't my anger that defeated her. It was my composure. She expected shouting, expected accusations, expected me to crumble. Instead, I gave her nothing, and nothing was stronger than she could withstand. One afternoon, after another meeting with my lawyer, I walked out of his office and stood on the steps overlooking the city. The sun was bright, the air sharp with the smell of winter coming in. I closed my eyes for a moment and let it wash over me. For the first time in years, I wasn't waiting for the other shoe to drop. I wasn't bracing for disappointment. I wasn't questioning my worth. I was simply living, standing there with the knowledge that I had faced betrayal and walked away stronger than it ever imagined I could be. I don't know what Emily tells herself now, or how she explains that night when the waiter placed not just a bill but the end of our marriage in front of her. Maybe she tells people she was blindsided. Maybe she paints me as cold, ruthless. Maybe she pretends it never happened the way it did. But none of that matters. The truth is etched into memory, and everyone who sat at that table carries it with them. She toasted to new beginnings, and I gave her exactly that. And in that moment, when I walked out into the night leaving her speechless in front of everyone, she finally understood what I had come to learn long before. Silence is not weakness. Silence is a blade. Silence is justice. Silence is the moment you stop giving someone the power to hurt you. So if you've stayed with me through this story, do me a favor, subscribe, hit that like button, and leave a comment. Tell me what you would have done, because sometimes the quietest actions leave the loudest echoes.